Thank you, Anna. Hi, everyone. I'm Hanovi Schoonover, the Training and Resource Coordinator for Redwind Consulting, and I'll be the host for this webinar. Today, we'll be going over Two Spirit LGBTQ policies and procedures and how we better serve the Two Spirit Native LGBTQ population. Today with me is Lenny Haze, and Lenny is going to be the presenter for today. Lenny is an enrolled member of the Sisseton Wahpeton of the northeast corner of South Dakota. He is also the owner and operator of Tate Topa Consulting, LLC. He has extensive training in mental and chemical health issues that impact Two-Spirit LGBTQ community. Lenny has always worked within the Native American community and was a consultant and therapist with the Little Earth of United Tribes in Minneapolis. He is currently in private practice specializing in Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ issues with adults and youth, and was most recently selected to be a technical assistant and consultant with the Office for Victims of Crime in Washington, D.C. I'll now turn it over to him.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this conversation, this webinar in regards to Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ issues. So as a Native person, we always present ourselves and identify who we are. So this is who I am. My name is Lenny Haze. I'm from the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate of the northeast corner of South Dakota. I currently reside here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I am the founder and owner of Tate Topa Consulting. I do a lot of work in regards to Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ issues. I discuss the mental and chemical health issues that impact this community. I work with youth, and I'm also part of doing work within the welfare system, child welfare, because I also believe, too, that our youth, our young people are often misunderstood in regards to being a part of the foster care system. I'm an advocate and I'm a mentor. I'm an educator and motivational speaker. In my language, one of the questions I always ask when I go across the country presenting on this topic, one of the questions I always like to ask within tribal communities is, do you know the word in your language that would identify someone like me? In my language, which is Dakota Sioux, I am defined as a Winkta. So the term Two-Spirit has many different meanings within different tribes. So I really would like to be clear in helping people to understand that the Two-Spirit identity doesn't always mean the same within all tribal communities, but it is a universal term. I am also a survivor of the child sexual, physical, and mental abuse, and I'm also a survivor of the foster care system. So if you were able to join the previous webinar, I really got into a deep discussion in regards to Two-Spirit identity. Today I'm just going to present on some information, not all information that I shared on the last webinar. So I'm hoping that if you didn't see my previous webinar with Redwind Consulting, that you would go back and take a look at that to get a deeper understanding. So the term Two-Spirit comes from, it's the direct translation of the Ojibwe term. I am not going to even attempt to pronounce this because I don't want to mess it up. But what it means is that the individual carries both a male and female spirit within one body. Often when I talk about Two-Spirit identity, one of the things that I say is that individual often will sometimes have a spirit that's much more dominating. So I always like to describe myself when talking about that is that I always say that my feminine spirit is much more dominating than my male spirit because it comes out in my mannerisms, my voice, how I carry myself. But then I also like to joke about it too and say I can be butch too, I can carry wood. So it's okay to laugh, you know. So what it also means is that within Native community, when we talk about Two-Spirit identity, we say that within our culture that there is a third and fourth gender. So how you can view it is like you have a male and female spirit, which definitely identifies as heterosexual. So the third gender would be the male Two-Spirit, and the fourth gender would be the female spirit. So so today we would consider that homosexual and lesbian today. The word came about, emerged from a intertribal, third annual Intertribal Native American First Nations Gay Lesbian Conference in Winnipeg. And one of the things when I talk about this is remember that we have, today, 573 tribes. We have over, I believe, 150 plus languages throughout the country. And so a lot of these individuals came together and they wanted to come up with one word, a universal word to be used across the country. And remember, like I said earlier, often tribes have their own specific word that they use within their language to identify someone like me, because I do identify as a Dakota Two-Spirit male. And so what they wanted to do was basically sort of take a step back from the mainstream language of LGBTQ. And so they came up with this word called Two-Spirit. And so the purpose of that also was to define that connection to culture and spirituality. I believe today a lot of our people, even within the mainstream community, often really misunderstands and misinterprets what it means to be Two-Spirit. And often what happens also too is that we have a lot of our mainstream population that identifies LGBTQ that often want to put claim on the word Two-Spirit. So I really always encourage individuals that if you hear of non-Native people who are trying to use the word or call themselves Two-Spirit, my hope is that that we're correcting them, because it is a word that was created by Native community, by Native individuals, and it should only be used by Native people. So before colonization, our Two-Spirit people were held with the utmost honor and respect within tribal communities. We played many community roles within Native population. So each tribe is different. I always want to stress that in how they view and community roles that our Two-Spirit people played. So here are some of the things, the roles that we played in community before colonization. We were considered healers and medicine people. We were parents of orphan children. We were conveyors of oral tradition and songs. So as you can see, on some of the community roles, I have tribes that are identified after each of them. The foretellers of the future, they were name givers of children or adults, which was common within the Oglala Lakota Nation. They were nurses during war expeditions. They were potters, matchmakers, makers of feather regalia, and they played special roles in Sundance, which is really common within South Dakota. I do have Two-Spirit colleagues who are a part of Sundance and actually do have their own Sundance, which is run by a Two-Spirit person. So these are some of the roles that we played before colonization. One of the things that I also want to mention too is that before colonization, our people were treated with love and respect. You know, in colonization, they came in, missionaries and Europeans came into our tribal communities and they started murdering our Two-Spirit people. So actually what happened was our people actually hit us to protect us. And so a lot of people don't know that history, which is really important. One of the things I always say is that our leaders and our chiefs, they loved us so much that they actually hit us to prevent what was happening to us, but they actually forgot about us. As a mental health professional and going across the country and talking about these the issues that impacts our community, these are some of the issues that really impacts our community. One of the pieces that I like to talk about is the loss of Native identity as well as loss of culture. You know, our people played such a huge role when it came to ceremony, and because of colonization, that changed how our own people viewed us within our tribal communities. And so a lot of our Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ people and even our youth are impacted by a lot of these issues. When we talk about loss of culture, what has happened is that a lot of our tribal communities don't allow Two-Spirit males or females to be a part of the sweat lodge or a part of ceremony. So what happens is that they're often shunned. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of Two-Spirit people within community in regards to community work, even one-on-one, meeting with them one-on-one. One of the things that I know of is that the community is really impacted by a lot of trauma. One of the issues that we don't also talk about is the child welfare system. We do have individuals in community who have been a part of the foster care system, or they were often adopted out without having that connection to Native identity. We have huge issues of drug and alcohol abuse, depression, suicide, discrimination. One of the things that I also like to talk about too is that we do have a huge unreported sexual assaults. I was quite amazed in the fact that when I did some work with a Native organization here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, they wanted to discuss the violence within this community. And so what we did was we developed some focus groups, and what we did was we invited individuals who identified as lesbian, gay, or transgender, bisexual to the table. And so what we basically wanted to do was to collect some data in regards to the violence that occurred or has occurred within the community. And so we had 15 individuals that came to the table, and one of my astonishments was that 14 out of the 15 individuals that were brought to the table to discuss violence within the community all reported being sexually abused as a child and even as an adult. So that just blew me away. So that just tells you how much, even though this was just a small amount of individuals that came forward, but it also makes you think about the unreported sexual assaults that have happened within the community by, you know, the population. And a lot of our Two-Spirit people have been impacted by family sexual abuse. And then as adults often have been assaulted by mainstream community. One of the issues that we also don't give a lot of talk about is the impact of sex and human trafficking. In 2013 or 14, I believe, when I did a presentation out in at the big Indian Nations conference out in Palm Springs, I was approached by a FBI agent after she attended my presentation on the Two-Spirit community. One of the things that she said to me was that her and I needed to talk because they knew that there was trafficking of Two-Spirit youth from Minnesota to South Dakota. But one of the issues that also occurs within our tribal communities is that we have lack of data of this incidents that are happening, and so a lot of times even within our own tribal communities, they don't believe that this is happening. So there's a lot of issues that are really impacting the community, which is, lack of data. We are included in the mainstream data, but one of the questions I always ask when I do talk with people about data, how much of that data is Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ people? And often they're unable to answer that question. But that's really crucial. Data is really crucial. The only data that we have that, if you're interested in learning about violence within the community, is the research that was done by Dr. Karina Walters. You can Google that information. It's called the Honors Project. And what she did was she went into, along with her team, they went into the 6 largest urban Two-Spirit communities and collected data in regards to violence of all forms within community. What they didn't do was that they didn't go into tribal communities to collect data. And so I'm always advocating for tribal communities in regards to collecting information within that community, because we do so well in urban communities, but we don't do well within tribal communities. So I'm always thinking about how much of our Two-Spirit people are suffering from many forms of violence, issues, bullying. Another piece that I really advocate strongly for is that being included within missing and murdered. What I also talk about is that having 5 individuals from my own tribe, within within just a little over a 2-year span, 5 of these individuals who identified as either both Two-Spirit or Native LGBTQ died by some form of violence. So I'm always reminding people not to forget this population when it comes to missing and murdered. So there's so many of these issues that have really impacted the community in so many different ways, and so I'm always strongly advocating for better services for these individuals who identify. One of the things that I feel that has been a great accomplishment was the creation of a Two-Spirit support group here in Minneapolis. And so before we did that work, I asked the organizers if it would be possible if we can do a survey. And so what we did was we put out a survey here in Minneapolis. We also did a survey statewide in Minnesota, and then we went national with the survey. And so one of the questions that we wanted to ask the individuals or the respondents was, what can we do to help you as a community? And we had different boxes to check, and even a blank box for them to fill in what they felt was important. As a mental and chemical health therapist, I assumed that the response would be much more higher in regards to mental health services. That was only 28% of the population that we surveyed. 51% of the respondents to this survey requested culture and spirituality. So as part of the support group, what we did was what I felt was important was bringing in a male and female Two-Spirit person who was connected to culture and spirituality to help teach the individuals who are part of this group. One of the things that I felt important that needed to be said too was that often when we come from a place of a tribe, often we speak in a way where it's sort of like this is how it should be done. I wanted to step away from that because what I didn't want to do was to chase people away. So it was talking to these individuals in how they presented themselves and how they were teaching to these people who were part of the support group, reminding them to say, well, for example, as a Dakota person, this is how I was taught when it came to ceremony or teachings. We took the group down to an area here in Minneapolis that was sacred to the Dakota people, and we wanted to teach them that connection to culture and spirituality. And one of the things that we did was we showed them how to pick red willow. One of the things that we also talked about was the proper way of picking sage, which is one of our medicines that we use within all tribal communities. And those were the important pieces about teaching about culture and spirituality. So, and then we did several, a lot of different activities, but we also talked about some of the issues that impacts our community in regards to addiction, mental health issues, addiction of all forms, and just creating a space for them to be able to talk about their own trauma. So we were quite involved with connecting them with, mental health services. So that's one of the good things, and I think we need to do that more often throughout the country in regards to our Two-Spirit community, but also connecting them to the many different societies that are all over the country, like the Montana, which is a huge event where they have a lot of Two-Spirit people from different parts of the country that actually come and attend that. We also have the Bates Powwow, which is out in San Francisco, which is the largest and the first community that created a powwow specifically to honor Two-Spirit people. So we have good things that are happening within our community, but often I'm always reminded by my colleagues and friends who are always saying, Lenny, you're always talking about the bad things that are happening in our community, and it's important that you talk about the good things that are happening also in our community. So I'm reminded of that. So one of the things that I really want to be clear about, because this is important information that I'm going to be presenting on within the transgender community, but one of the things when I have people who ask me to talk about or present on transgender issues, one of the things that I remind them of is that it's important to invite individuals who identify as transgender, because I can talk about the statistics that are impacting the transgender community, but I cannot present on what it's like to be transgender, because it's totally, totally different. One of the things that I often say throughout the country too when I present on issues that impact the community, and specifically the transgender community, is that I believe professionally and personally that the transgender community is triply oppressed, meaning that they're oppressed by their own families, they're oppressed by their own community, and they're also oppressed within the gay community. Often what I have seen and had conversations with people is that often they're not often welcomed within gay community. They're made fun of. They're not, invited to the table to have conversation. So I'm always reminding people of the amazing transgender people that we have across the community who are doing amazing work, and specifically within the Native community. If you are wanting a study that was done that came out specifically on the Native transgender population, please email me and I can share those resources with you. But first of all, so we're going to talk about the violence of all forms on the transgender individual and community. Transgender people experience poverty twice the national rate. While, transgender people of color experience 4 times the national poverty rate. Transgender people of color are 2.59 times likely to experience police violence compared to non-people of color. transgender people of color are 2.37 times likely to experience discrimination compared to non-people of color. So some of these specific statistics were taken from the National Coalition on Anti-Violence Program. You can actually, if you want to learn more, please Google that and you'll be able to gather more information in regards to violence within the transgender community. I think this was shared twice. So violence of all forms on the transgender individual community, they are 2.9 times likely to experience police violence, 2.7 times likely to experience physical violence by the police compared to non-transgender survivors of victims, 2.14 times likely to experience discrimination compared to non-transgender survivors and victims. So, you know, when I talk about the trans community and educating and bringing awareness, I always encourage individuals to seek out these reports and studies that have been done on this population. But more importantly, if you are wanting someone to come in and do some training, I always encourage you to invite transgender people who can give lived experience in regards to the many issues that impact this community. This is something to think about, and it still blows me away because I do have transgender colleagues who I work with in many different capacities, and also presenting with when it comes to Native population, Native community. The life expectancy of a transgender individual is 35 years old. Isn't that just crazy? I have heard my transgender colleagues who discuss this and ever are so thankful to even live to be past 35 years old because of the many issues that impact this community, the violence, the sexual violence, the murders, the missing of transgender individuals. So something to think about. It's sad, but often holds truth. So this is an important piece when we talk about the transgender community. So, you know, a lot of us have grown up with inappropriate language to use with individuals who identify both male and females and transgender people. I know one of the things that I talk about is that the word that was given to me in my language, I grew up with that being taught as a derogatory term, when really it was a term that was, or a word that was given to me by my people. So, you know, it's important that you don't use the word fag when addressing an individual. You don't use the word queer, only if that person identifies as a queer. One of the things that I always say too is that when I grew up, growing up on a reservation, the word queer was another derogatory term. So today, I still cringe when I hear that word. But what I also like is the fact that a lot of our young people who identify are taking that word back, which is, you know, excellent and great for our young people. But a lot of our older people who identify as Two Spirit or Native LGBTQ do not connect with that word because it was such a derogatory term growing up. It's inappropriate to use the word tranny, but often you will hear individuals within the transgender community who will use that term to maybe talk to another friend or colleague who, and that's okay. I mean, that's okay within their community, but it's not okay outside of the community. It's important that you don't use the words he, she when identifying a male to female. You do not use the word she-male when you're identifying a female to male. the word hermaphrodite is not used anymore. We use the word intersex is the appropriate word to use, and we do not use the word it. One of the things that really upsets me in regards to all these labels is that often, we are a society that is connected to labels. I don't like labels because often I believe that, it's inappropriate. But I mean, that's the world we live in. We use labels. And often, sometimes when we use labels, often what happens too is that we're dehumanizing people when we use this kind of language. So it's really important to correct people when you hear people using this. Our community is so impacted by homophobia, transphobia, which are really impactful on the community and often brings a lot of hate. So one of the things that that I was a part of in a lot of the work that I've done within tribal communities is child welfare. Like I said earlier, I am a survivor of the foster care system. I grew up in a very harsh community in regards to even being accepted within my own community. I experienced a lot of things in regards to being forced to go to therapy and being forced to see a psychologist who was more emphasized on who I was as a young gay boy and not really looking at the trauma that I experienced. So I don't know if he was trying to change my way of thinking or how I identified, and one of the things I always laugh about is the fact that he emphasized too much on something I didn't even understand about being a young gay boy because nobody ever taught me about my identity. And so as a young person, you get really confused about who you are when you don't have someone who's teaching you about who you are. So that's a failure of the child welfare system on me. And I publicly speak about that. One of the things that I really stress is that we need to do more work within our own community. We're failing as a Native community because we're not teaching our young people about Two-Spirit identity or the word that they may use in their language to identify, because it's, before colonization, if you think about it, as I said earlier, the Two-Spirit community was highly respected within tribal communities, and because of colonization, it changed a lot of our way of thinking. And what I also talk about too is that before colonization, when a child was coming out, often within some tribal communities, they would often have ceremony, or they would often have a celebration for this child. And today that doesn't happen. This is a different presentation when I talk about the child welfare system, but the statistics of even our LGBTQ youth who are in foster care are astonishing in regards to all forms of violence. So what you're seeing right now is a model that I helped create with Capacity Building Center for Tribes. And this model was specifically created in regards to welcoming and safe spaces for Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ youth in foster care. One of the things that I want to stress right now is that it's important that we ask individuals how they identify both as adults and youth. What I am seeing across the country when I go into tribal communities is that a lot of our young people are connecting to the words LGBTQ rather than identifying as Two-Spirit or Native LGBTQ, which is fine, because I don't I'm always one to say that we should never force people to choose a label, that we should let them choose who they call themselves and how they identify, because often we make a lot of assumptions in thinking, mislabeling people, individuals, or, you know, there may be a Native person who may only call themselves as Native LGBTQ. We may have another individual who may identify as a Two-Spirit person. So we should ask the question, like, how do you identify? Because that's really, really important, because we don't like labels. Plus, you know, the fact that when you're asking that individual how they identify, you're also giving them power in regards to who they see themselves as. So I'm always reminding people of that. I identify, before I understood Two-Spirit identity, I identified as a gay male because that's all I knew. Nobody taught me about culture and spirituality. And so when I moved to the cities, you know, over 20 years ago and heard the word Two-Spirit, I sought out individuals who identified as Two-Spirit, and sat with them and talked with them. And then as I developed in my work and did my own research, my own understanding of Two-Spirit identity, I today now say that in order for me to get away from that colonized way of thinking, I will identify first as a Winkta, which is a word that was given to me by my people in who I am. Second, I will identify as a Two-Spirit male. Remember that the word Two-Spirit didn't come about until 1990, so that's a fairly new word. And lastly, I will identify as a gay male. So that's my way of decolonizing my way of thinking and how I view myself. So it's really important to sort of think about that. So getting back to the model, I apologize. So this model was created specifically for the youth who are part of the foster care system. But we also developed this model in regards to helping individuals looking at themselves. So because the question is, how can we provide better services for Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ people? So as Native people, so think it in the middle, we approach it with love and compassion, because that's one of the things that I've been taught as a Native person, is that we always approach things with compassion. You know, we have a lot of individuals within our tribal communities that are impacted by so many different issues. So this model, like I said, it may specifically talk about creating safe and welcoming spaces for Two-Spirit youth, but we also created this model so that it can be integrated into organizations, Native organizations, child welfare, any organizations that want to specifically help Two-Spirit people in many different ways. So, so this model can be changed. It's not something that's in stone, because that was one of the things that we discussed when we developed this. So, as you know, as Indian people, you know, we believe in everything is in a circular motion. So the first thing that you can do is approach with compassion and love for all of our people. And so the first things that you can do is learn about Two-Spirit identity. Remember, all tribes are different. Go in with a mindset that not everything is the same. We do have communities that do not identify as Two-Spirit because in their culture, in their language, it means something else. So I have a lot of colleagues, as an example, who are Navajo, and they will not call themselves Two-Spirit because in their language, within their culture, that means something else. And so they do have a specific word that they use in their language, but even then, a lot of my Navajo colleagues who identify will not call themselves Notlay because in their language, that's such a powerful word. And so a lot of them won't even connect with the word just because it's such a highly looked at word. So it means a lot. So sort of think about that. And then you have people who in tribal communities that will only identify as Two-Spirit, which is okay. It's not a bad thing. So there is a lot of history that's written and told about Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ people. And so one of the things that I always say when I talk about my Navajo friends and colleagues is that I really envy them because they know they have pictures, they have written history of Two-Spirit people. When I think about the Midwest, there's very little that's written about us. There's very little pictures of us. Example, I connected with my own tribe and our people who save our history, preserve our history, and I asked the question, do you have any pictures or anything that's written about Winktas? So she went back and looked in our archives and basically told me that she couldn't find anything, but can only tell me what she knows orally, which is the fact that our people looked at Winktas as being powerful, sacred. So that's only in the information coming from my own tribe that I can share about my tribe. But the one thing to remember is that each tribe is different. So if you're working with individuals who may come from a different tribe, and of any interest, you can ask them, like, how did your tribe view you? And that would start out some great conversation. Advocate. We can advocate in many different ways. I advocate within, the child welfare system. I advocate in regards to sex and human trafficking of our individuals. I advocate about the need for and the collection of data in regards to the violence that occurs within the community. So there's many different ways that you can advocate for individuals. What we also need to do is to break down barriers. I strongly believe that a lot of the information that's collected in the mainstream LGBTQ community, often what happens is that when collecting information or data from individuals who identify, they never specifically ask the question to Native people, how do you identify? Do you identify as a Two-Spirit person? Do you identify as a Native LGBTQ person? So a lot of that data and information is also intertwined that often we're not even a part of the conversation. So that's one of the things that I want to break down is those barriers that are preventing from us from collecting that information and asking the proper questions. So as an individual, you can do a lot of these, what's in this model. And remember, things can be added, things can be taken away from this model. It's not set in stone. One of the things that I talk about when it comes to the child welfare system is consider becoming a mentor, because we do have a lot of people in our community who don't understand about Two-Spirit identity. And when we talk about the child welfare system, we have some amazing Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ people out there who are doing amazing work within community and for community that our young people need to learn about these individuals. They can possibly become mentors, teachers, so that they can help our young people. And even, helping within our own adult community, because I've heard many times from individuals that one of the reasons why they don't identify as Two-Spirit is because they don't understand it. So it's like, for me, just stepping up to the plate and sharing the information that I know about Two-Spirit identity is important, because it is, for me, my understanding of Two-Spirit identity is that connection to culture and spirituality. One of the things that we also need to think about in working with Two-Spirit people is we have to check our own biases. You know, often religion plays a huge part in how we view this population, both, you know, as Native people and as the mainstream LGBTQ people. Often we are so connected to religion, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But often religion plays a huge part in how we look at individuals who identify, even within Native community. I'm respectful to people who want to be connected to religion, who want to be connected to the church. But one of the things that I always remind people is that I don't want to be forced to believe something that I don't believe is true, but often it has created division within families, you know, through, and we know that. I mean, look at all the things that are happening today nationally in many different arenas for individuals who identify as LGBTQ or Native Two-Spirit. So it's really important that if we're going to work with individuals, and as an individual, you have to check your own biases. You have to check your own judgment. You have to be willing to ask people to call you out if there is something that you may be saying that's not appropriate. One of the things that's also important when working with this community too, and I learned this from experience, and I often think about that. Example, I have a transgender individual who is amazing, Native transgender person who does a lot of training in regards to her community. And one of the things that I didn't realize that I was doing until she approached me, and she approached me in a good way, it wasn't a bad way. One of the things that she said to me is that when I would talk about her in community, I would say, oh, this is so-and-so, and she identifies as transgender and does amazing work. And one of the things that I didn't realize was that before I was doing that, I didn't ask her permission to out her. So what I was doing was I was outing her without her permission, which can cause many issues. It could cause harm on her. It could cause, but I used her name in outing her. So that really made me think about, like, how do I talk about individuals in community to make sure that I'm not outing them? One of the things I know of is that I can't be using their specific name when talking about them. So one of the things that I did with this individual who identifies as Native transgender, one of the things that I had to do was I had to approach her and ask her, is it okay if I talk about you? Is it okay that I use your name, or would you not prefer me to use your name when I'm talking about the work that you do? So it was just having that conversation with her and getting permission to use, say her name. So that, you know, that's something to think about. And I think a lot of times that we do that without even thinking that we're outing a person when we should be saying, you know, a colleague or a friend instead of saying their name. Because when you do that, you also put them in danger, like I said before. So there's many different ways to check your own biases in how you view the community. Even when we're talking about, you know, domestic violence, we're still struggling with trying to provide the proper services for these individuals, even within tribal communities. But we're getting there. We're doing a lot better than what we did 5-10 years ago. When I began to start this work. So I see a lot of change that's happening. I have a lot of, you know, people who are asking questions, you know, and making mistakes. But one of the things that I try not to do when working with individuals in the many different issues that impacts the community, I try not to do it in a way that's with anger or correcting them in a bad way. But, you know, usually by responding, well, maybe it's important for you to look at it this way, or, making suggestions. So, so as an individual, when you look at this model, these are some of the things that you can do for yourself, or you can advocate with other people in regards to this, about how to look at yourself individually. And also, individually, these are some of the questions when I talk about the model. These are some important questions to ask yourself. So what does your cultural values teach? Because in each of our tribes, we do have cultural values that we're taught. As I said earlier, like one of the most important things that I was taught by a two-spirit female when I was reconnected with culture and spirituality, one of the things that she said to me that I carry with me all the time in regards to, just helping individuals in many different ways. But one of the things that she said to me was that if you don't have compassion, you don't have nothing. You don't have nothing. And that's very powerful when you think about, like, having compassion for all people that come from many different backgrounds, issues. So for me, that's really, really important. Ask yourself, how do you advocate for individuals who identify? Do you turn your back on them? Do you try to find a proper training? Because I think sometimes, too, what happens is often, which I don't think is a good thing, is that we have individuals who are non-native who will talk about two-spirit people and not accurately get it right. Example, I attended a webinar here in Minnesota with the organization that was talking about transgender youth in the schools. And one of the questions that popped up during this webinar was, what about two-spirit people? And the trainer, basically, when she described two-spirit people, said it in a way that wasn't even correct. First of all, she said two-spirit people are individuals who don't identify as male or female. And of course, I was very insulted by that, and reached out and said, I think it's important that if you're going to talk specifically about two-spirit people, that you specifically say it right, because what you said is not true. So, that's another way that we can advocate individually for this population. And one of the things, too, is I always believe that it's important, and I hear this from my colleagues all the time, that if you're going to do these types of trainings, it's important to invite someone who identifies or who has had experience with whatever you may be talking about, violence or the child welfare system, because we do have a lack of people who can provide those services, but it's also important to educate yourself, bring awareness to all the issues that impact the community if you want to help community. What barriers are preventing you? That's the piece I was talking about in regards to, like, educating yourself, inviting people who identify to the table. Ask the question, what were you taught about individuals who identify, good or bad? Obviously, some of us know about our people within our tribal communities. Some of it is good, some of it is bad. But one of the things that I know of, and sort of something for you to think about, is that before I knew my identity as when I was younger, when I didn't understand two-spirit identity, or I didn't even understand the word winkta that's used in my tribal community to identify who I am. I grew up with that being such a derogatory term, being bullied, hearing bad things about that word. Often I cringed as a young person every time I would hear that word because it was used against me in such a bad way. But today, that's one of the first things that I do when I identify is that I identify as a winkta, and then a two-spirit male, and then a gay male. So these are really some questions to ask yourself when you're advocating. Now we're going to talk about organizations. Some of the things that you can do within your organization, or maybe even an organization that you're working with. Here are some ideas. As I said earlier, in the middle circle, we always approach with love and compassion for people. Again, we educate ourselves, educate your organization about Two-Spirit people, invite people in to do trainings. I've done trainings within organizations, with boards, coalitions. I've done trainings within even master level social workers, mental health providers, and helping them to understand how to work with Two-Spirit people. Because, I know that all people mean well, but often, we need to sort of understand, well, how can we do things differently? How do I get it right when I work with people? And often remember, we're all going to make mistakes, and that's fine, but try to correct the mistake and try not to do the mistake over and over. One of the things, and I don't mean this as a bad way either, and I'm sure a lot of you use pronouns. When I'm asked, do you use pronouns? First of all, I don't use pronouns because I think pronouns is a form of colonization. I understand where it came from, but after talking with elders within my community and asking them questions about how do you view pronouns, what do you think about pronouns, and one of the things that I just took away from the conversations that I had with elders in the community is that I'm reminded that even within my own language, we have a word that describes a male and a female. And what I found really impacting was when the elder said, before colonization, we treated people with the utmost respect and honor. We didn't force people to do things. We accepted our people for the way they were, so thinking about Two-Spirit people before colonization. And so for me, the reason why I don't use pronouns is because of that reason, because I do believe it's a form of colonization. What I tell people is, call me Lenny. If you're going to talk about me in a sentence, I'm okay with you using he and his, but today when we ask people which pronouns do you prefer to use, we should be turning the question around and asking them, do you prefer to use pronouns? I'll give you another example. I'm part of a national advisory council, and we were on a conference call. And the individual who was doing the conference call, or who was heading the conference call, wanted us to go around in a circle and introduce ourselves, which organization we were affiliated with, and then asked us to use pronouns, or how do we identify with pronouns. And so when it came to me, the individual before me was from a national organization that does a lot of LGBTQ work, and so he went through the process and ended with, I'm he, him, his, and then it came to me, and then I identified who I was, what organization I'm with, and then I made the comment, I don't use pronouns. And right away, the individual who spoke before me, he spoke up and said, I didn't realize that we can do that. He said, I don't use pronouns either. And so often, we get into that mindset of, like, we assume that people use them. We should be asking them, instead of saying, what pronouns do you use? We should be asking the question, do you prefer to use pronouns? So, and of course I have, people who don't believe my way of thinking, and that's okay. I'm not looking down on people who use pronouns. If you prefer to use pronouns, that's okay. That's who you are. But I always remind people, don't force me to do something that I'm not comfortable with. So that's really important. Do you have, are you displaying affirming materials within your organization? One of the things that I advocate when it comes to child welfare, especially with organizations that are providing licensures for parents to become foster parents, do you have pictures of same-sex couples with children? That piece is really important too, because we have, even within the Two Spirit community here in Minneapolis, what I've seen and so proud of is that we do have Two Spirit couples who have children, who are foster parents or who have adopted children. And often sometimes I believe that they're not in a place of welcoming. So are you displaying that information in your organization? When we talk about even brochures about Two-Spirit people, I have a brochure that I helped with a Native organization here in Minneapolis, or St. Paul, in the creation of educating people about Two-Spirit identity. That brochure has gone across the country. Displaying that kind of information within your organization. Create an awareness campaign. We have organizations that are talking about Two-Spirits, individuals who identify as Two-Spirit or Native LGBTQ who, are doing campaigns in regards to same-sex marriage or suicide prevention or HIV, that kind of work. And I think, too, a lot of individuals don't understand that when same-sex marriage was passed in 2015 across the country, it didn't even impact our tribal communities, because remember, our tribal communities are their own sovereign nation, so they get to create their own laws. And so I believe the last time I heard, I may be wrong, but I believe it was 26 plus tribes out of 573 tribes in the country that allow same-sex marriage. There's 13 tribes who have actually banned same-sex marriage. So that's also something to think about too. Form an inclusive and diverse board. One of the things I talk about is that, we have some amazing leaders out in the community, just even inviting them to be a part of your board, because they can bring a lot to the table. So that's another important piece about an organization. Establish a mentoring program. For instance, an example would be like the Two Spirit support group that's happening here in an organization here in Minneapolis that provides weekly services for individuals who identify, a mentoring program for young people. What I like about a Native organization here in Minneapolis, or St. Paul, is that they are a homeless shelter for Native youth. But they really advocate for the Native trans youth, youth who identify. What I like, is the fact that they have a section of their shelter where to protect trans youth. But what I like the most is the fact that they ask transgender youth, where do you prefer to be? Do you prefer to be in how you identify today? Do you prefer to be in, male or female population? Or would you prefer to be over here where we have a specific room and bathroom that you can use? So that's like one of the most important pieces, is that they're giving them an option. They're not just putting them where they think they should be. Which can cause a lot of damage, both mentally and emotionally when we're not asking those questions. Collect data. Like I said earlier, we have we have no data. in regards to Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ people. Nationally, we're still using Dr. Karina Walter's the Honors Project's data in regards to describing the violence that occurs in the community. Engage same-sex families within community. It's always nice for me when I go out into tribal or community events and I see Two-Spirit families together with their children, you know, engaging them to be a part of community in regards to, you know, many different things, you know. That's something to think about. Provide support services. But first of all, I mean, the most important piece of all of this is just educating and bringing awareness to yourself about all the issues that impact the community and how you can be helpful. Our people, my people, are so, they're often forgotten, and they are an underserved population. So those are some of the most powerful words that I always use when I talk about the community. Create policies and procedures. I'm always reminded by a Two-Spirit colleague who has said repeatedly when talking about policies and procedures that policies and procedures can be changed. Often, sometimes we have that mindset of that once a policy or procedure is created, it's like set in stone. But often people are afraid to change policies. One of the things that also happened here in Minneapolis was in 2015 when I was the chairman of the Minnesota Two-Spirit Society. What had happened was at a powwow, there was a Two-Spirit couple who were out on the floor, and what they were going to be doing was they were going to be honoring a heterosexual couple. And what happened was the MC said something, made a remark that he shouldn't have made, was that he asked the Two-Spirit couple to leave the floor, and he responded by saying, no boy-on-boy action, no girl-on-girl action, keep it traditional. And I wasn't there, but what had happened was my phone blew up. And so what we did was, as a group and as a board, what we did was we approached the organization and asked to meet with them. This space that the powwow was being used was often rented out to organizations or groups in regards to like having a community event. And so the executive director asked us, she let us know that that wasn't their event, but also the fact that, you know, they rent out the space. But what was so amazing was she said to us, I want you to help us to develop a policy to protect your population. And so they were the first Native organization here in Minneapolis that actually created a policy in regards to the protection and non-discrimination of Two-Spirit people. And then after that, 4 other Native organizations followed. So, you know, thinking like, are we written into your policy? Are you talking about same-sex couples? Are you talking about people who identify? Do you have a, you know, discrimination rule within your organization? So there's a lot to think about. And again, you know, check your biases as an organization. You know, as your top leaders, are they, how do they respond to individuals who identify as Two-Spirit or Native LGBTQ people? So these are some of the ideas. But like I said earlier, too, this model was created in regards to where it can be changed. Things can be taken away, things can be added. So this just gives you an idea how you can change things within your organization. As an organization, again, here's some questions that you can ask. I mean, how are you bringing education and awareness into your organization? Do you have materials that are on display? Do you have individuals who identify on your board or staff? Do you have a mentoring program? Do you have same-sex couples and families in your community? are you welcoming to them, and how are you welcoming to them? Do you have policies in the protection non-discrimination of individuals who identify? Is this policy displayed? Do you check your own thoughts and how you and your organization views individuals who identify? So, you know, these are some ideas, and my hope is that that this information that's presented will be helpful for you as an individual and also as an organization, how you can do things differently to be supportive of individuals who identify. So, it is 2:10 my time. I presented a lot of information. I hope it was helpful. And I think now what we're going to do is open it up for any questions.
So if you have a question, you can put it in the chat box. You can also click on the hand button. It should be, I believe, near the top left.
Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Or if you have a comment or anything like that, potentially add. All right, well, it does not seem like we have any questions, so I will wrap us up. Thank you, Anna, once again, for hosting us. Thank you, Lenny, for presenting. So, coming up, we have the mandated reporting webinar, which will be on April 3rd, 2019, Wednesday. It'll be at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. And then we have securing housing options for participants, and that'll be on April 24th, 2019, also at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. Redmond hosts a TH forum, and you can get to it by going to the Redmond website and click on the Programs tab at the top right. Then below that, go to the OVW Tribal Technical Assistance, and then Transitional Housing Tribal TA. In the middle of the page, you'll see an option that says Networking Forum. You can sign up there. So this form has a bit of issues where if you don't click on the eye icons next to the posts that you want to keep track of, it will not inform you if there are any updates on that post. So if there are any that you would like to keep track of or know when there's an update on, click on the little eye icon that is beside the name of the person who posted it and the date. And I believe that is all. So thank you everyone for coming. We hope to see you at the next webinar, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.